To welcome you in this room and also online for the second event that is going to be dedicated to the importance of speeches for the trust in democracy. And special welcome to our Vice President, Mr. Negrescu, who is responsible for the EPRS in the Parliament. When I was entering that building, I was looking at the door, and on the front of the door, the name of the Parliament. Parliament, Parlement, Parlament, I think Parlament in Danish, Parlament in Romanian, Parlamento, and so on and so forth. I think just Greek is different. But it's all about speaking. And I think the very essence of this house of democracy is about speaking, exchanging, listening. And that's where we are here today. And even before elections, before the election of democratic assemblies, in early forms of coming together, solving conflicts, taking decisions, I think this dimension of sitting together, speaking, was very central in communities in the early days. So, speeches are at the heart of the legislative branch, and we understand how the skills to speak, to debate, are essential to our democracy, for us here in particular in this multinational parliament. Debating, arguing, defending, convincing, and making Europe living, vibrant democracy. And we hear that in this coming 5 years, this coming term, there will be also quite some discussion on hate speech, so it's also about listening and respecting. So we will have the pleasure to have Vice President Negrescu to introduce this event, to members of the European Parliament and the assistants in the room, but also I understand there is quite a lot of people from the speechwriter communities in the Parliament and also in other institutions and beyond also the EU today, so welcome to you. This event builds up on a series of annual events on speeches and speech writing, and our objective is to inform and equip members and their teams with the information, research and reflection they need on the everyday. I'd just like to recall a few of these events that we had in 2019. We had Eric Schnur, the co-author of the Political Speechwriter Companion. In 2020, we had Viv Groskop on how to own the room, women at the art of brilliant speaking. It was during the pandemic, so it was an online event. We had also in 22 Joe Biden's senior speechwriter, Jeff Nussbaum, and he drew lessons on for speakers and speechwriters from undelivered speeches, so the speeches that never were spoken out because the events went in another way. And we had last year the director of the Professional Speechwriters Association, David Murray, on his book, What Only a Speech Can Do, Why Speeches Are Essential in Democratic Discourse. So as I said, the European Parliament is the house of democracy, and our Director General is the house of research, and we aim at bringing research to members in our various publications and also in our events. Vice President, you were elected first time in the Parliament in 2014, then you stayed for a while, and then you went back to Romania, where you were Minister of European Affairs, and you came back in the Parliament in June, July this year. You are responsible for this Directorate General, for the library. In the Bureau, your task also about communication, outreach and research, and you are a member of the following committees: Budgets, Legal Affairs and Subcommittee on Health. So we are looking very much to hear your views and your perspective to open the event today. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I would like to congratulate EPRS for organizing this conference today, and of course for organizing events designed to enable professionals here in the European Parliament, but also the level of the European institutions to improve their work. And today, of course, we have the great occasion to discuss about this issue with a prominent speaker that was introduced previously, someone that, of course, has wrote about how we can have better speeches, but also on the impact of the things that we are saying. Because, of course, when we speak about speeches, we speak about the messages that we are giving to people, and we have to understand that everything that we say does have an impact. Every word has an impact. Even when we make a pose, we have an impact. Even when we address a question, we generate a reaction. So indeed, Sometimes we tend to forget all of that, especially politicians, not the speechwriters. And sometimes I know speechwriters are disappointed that politicians do not follow the guidelines, as I tend to do as well. But you know, we are all human beings, and the human dimension is also important. So this is why today it's even more important to speak about the power of political rhetoric, the power of speeches. In a world where we speak more and more about artificial intelligence and the fact that ChatGPT can replace your work, we also need to speak about the human dimension, the personal touch, the personal stories, and how you can transform a speech from a list of ideas in something that makes sense, in selling a story, in involving the people that listen to you in the story that you are presenting. And this is not easy. Of course, you need to get trained if you want, or you have it naturally, but of course, you always need to learn. And indeed, from prominent academics like our guest today, we can actually learn on how to better do our job, on how we can, of course, reflect more about the messages that we are saying. Of course, today also, we all see that the radical speeches tend to become more attractive. Speaking about who you hate is more attractive than to speak about those that you love. Speaking about some particular groups and pointing the fingers to them seems more important than speaking about the social policies that you can build in order to improve the life of those people. And this is a reality that we have today. And we have it to take it as it is, while at the same time understanding that indeed there are higher expectations from citizens. And of course, maybe it's not as easy as it used to be. It's not as easy as it used to be in addressing some issues, in speaking about them. Also, some words have been used so often that they lost their content and their meaning. For instance, I entered this parliament 10 years ago. I'm already starting my third mandate. 10 years ago, when we were saying here, we will leave no one behind, it really had an impact. That meant the politician was really thinking about everyone and promoting fair and equal Europe. Today, everyone says that we should not leave anyone behind, even the ones that promote policies designed to leave people behind. So, indeed, when we speak about arguments, rhetorics, speeches, I believe, of course, we should not ignore that we should speak the truth. It's very important to see that between the message and the person addressing the issue, there is consistency. Because you might try to mislead people. It can work once or twice, but it cannot work on the long term. So it's very important between the speechwriter and the decision maker making the speech to have a certain connection in order for the content of the message to be fruitful and more effective. Of course, because I'm Vice-president of the European Parliament, I can speak for hours, like all politicians here. But we learned that we have limited time. But again, before giving the floor to our guest today, speaking about, again, speech writing, speaking about how we can have an impactful community, our two guests today, I want to again praise the work that the EPRS is doing and also thank the library services for accepting us here to organize the event. It's very important to give life to this building and especially to this wonderful library. We hope in the months to come that we'll come with even more initiatives designed to show what we managed to build here, because maybe you do not see it, but this library really has a lot of content. We are really happy that we've managed to build all of that, building basically what we will call in the future a sort of institutional European heritage. So this is really important, and I think also these conferences are giving to all of that meaning. So it's important to not forget about that. So thank you again for doing all of that, and I'm confident we'll have a very interesting and constructive debate today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vice-president Negrescu, for bringing your perspective and also your experience as a politician. I'm now turning to our guest speaker, Professor Jens Kjeldsen from the University of Bergen. You are Professor of Rhetoric, decades of research on speeches and speech writing. You are the author of the Speech Writing in Theory and Practice, an e-book that is actually part of these collections, Mr. Negrescu. While there is much research on communication, there is not so much research on speeches and speech writing. Talking about my own country, France, I think it's a bit missing. So we are very much looking forward to listening to you. So over to you.
Thank you. How do you feel when you stand in front of other people delivering a speech? Are you energized? Do you see it as a great opportunity, a great possibility? Are you nervous? Even afraid, perhaps? Many people are uncomfortable with speech making, especially, and this is important, young people. Many years ago, back in the late 70s, yes, I am that old, when I was a kid in elementary school, the teacher told a friend of mine to come forward to the teacher's desk. The kid was asked to present something. He came forward, stood there, tense, silent, beside the desk. Then suddenly, in his crotch, his pee spread out into his pants, creating an utterly embarrassing wet part. Now, I was just a kid, this is many years ago, but I never forgot this incident. And I think the story shows how deep the fear of public speaking can sit in people. When we stand alone in front of the group, we are isolated, vulnerable, and alone. We are in a position of judgment with no way of escaping. Just like I am now in front of you in the European Parliament. Now, I tell you this story to stress how fragile humans are when it comes to standing up and sounding their opinions. I tell you this story to demonstrate how important it is that everyone, yes, everyone, not just politicians and speechwriters, can make their voices heard. If people do not have the will and the ability to make their voices heard, to sound their opinions, then we simply do not have a democracy. And I tell you this story to say how thankful I am for the invitation to come here today and talk about something that is very close to my heart. The role of public speaking in public life and the necessity for democracy to provide all citizens with what we call rhetorical citizenship. So first and foremost, thank you to the wonderful Isabelle Gaudeul-Ehrhart for inviting me, setting everything up. If you have not read her wonderful book, Polarised, then you really should do so. Also because it has wonderful, wonderful images in it. Thank you as well to the European Parliamentary Research Service for organizing this event, especially to Etienne Bassot. And also thank you, Victor, for those insightful comments. I think you're right. We should try to speak the truth, no matter who we are. I am extremely grateful for the invitation, and thank you all of you, for coming and hearing my talk today. I am humbled, but very excited to be here. Now, I'm a Scandinavian and a European at heart. I'm Danish, but I live in Norway, so it's a special pleasure for me to be here today in the European Parliament. I am, as you just heard, a professor of rhetoric at the University of Bergen in Norway. I never thought that I would end up as an academic, but I did. And I've stayed because of the tradition in the study of rhetoric to unite theory with practice. In rhetoric and speech-making, speakers and speechwriters have something to learn from scholars doing communication theory. But scholars like me also have something to learn from speakers and speechwriters that are doing practice in rhetoric. So I'm a scholar, but I try to practice what I preach. I constantly try to learn from practitioners just like you, which is why I'm here today. You think that maybe I would be here to learn something to you, but really I am here to learn myself. So hopefully we can explore together the unique power of speech-making and its role in creating trust in democracy. Now I wonder what you all think about that question. Can speeches bring trust to democracy? Well, let me be honest from the beginning. Speeches cannot save democracy. On the contrary, you could claim the opposite. Speeches can destroy democracy. The speeches of Hitler, Stalin, and yes, even the speeches of Vladimir Putin point to the destructive power of speech-making. Now, some would perhaps disagree with me, but speeches do point sometimes to the destructive power. More than 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago actually, the Greek sophist Gorgias wrote about the force of the speech. Speech is a powerful ruler, Gorgias says. Its achievements are superhuman, for it is able to stop fear and remove sorrow, to create joy and augment pity. Gorgias paints a picture of speakers as powerful and audiences, you, as powerless and easily impressed with feelings and ideas. Speeches work like sorcery or drugs, he writes, this is 2,000 years ago. Just as different drugs expel different humors from the body, some stop it from being ill, but others stop it from living. So too, Gorgias says. Some speeches cause sorrow, some cause pleasure, some cause fear, some give the hearers confidence, some drug and bewitch the mind with evil persuasion. Now I hope that no one believes that you think that Miss Ursula von der Leyen or Roberta Metsola drug and bewitch the people with evil persuasion. If they do, it would be the speechwriter Ben Ray's responsibility, I think. But we should be aware that there is a widespread distrust in rhetorical eloquence. When I was a young scholar in Norway, a more seasoned professor asked me to come to her office. She had heard me praise the speeches of a young politician running in the US Democratic primary in 2008. The name was Barack Obama. I was blown away by Barack Obama's eloquence, impressed by the big crowds reacting unanimously to his well-crafted speeches. In his rhetorical grip, individuals became one as a group, and the group became one with the speaker. Barack Obama did what I'd studied. The eloquence of the ancients came to life. The tropes and figures of the sophists and of Cicero now moved audiences in the 21st century. Amazing. But my colleague was not impressed. She was concerned. She grew up in North Germany, was born in the city of Bärwelde in 1944. She grew up in a country in ruins. She began her life in a world of material and human destruction, a destruction that had been fertilized and nurtured through ideological rhetoric. My colleague was a kind woman, but that day in the office, she told me clearly, Jens, I do not like the way you praise the speeches of Barack Obama. I do not think that we should elevate the way he makes the audiences react in unison. It is not democratically healthy. She had seen the devastating consequences of a powerful orator. She had serious misgivings and suspicion towards any kind of orator, using words, making audiences act as one unity, molding people into one entity, stripping individuals of their individuality. Now, this is all sad, and I don't want to ruin the good atmosphere that we're here just a moment ago. I also do not want to claim that speeches destroy democracy, even though speeches can do that, contribute to the destruction of democracy. We all know this, and you can think of your own examples. But on the other hand, likewise, I cannot claim that speeches save democracy, but they can do that as well. Contribute to the creation and the salvation of a healthy democracy. Now, if we want speeches to bring trust, then we should keep this in mind. Speeches can both create and destroy democracy. We should be aware that people harbor distrust, a 2,000-year-old distrust in eloquence. From Gorgias and the ancient sophist to Obama, Trump, and European politicians as well, people look at speeches with suspicion. They know that the speaker seeks to use his eloquence to influence. But nobody wants to be influenced. Do you want to be influenced? Do you want to change your mind? Everybody wants to decide for themselves. So, if speeches are to bring trust in democracy, we must help people overcome the distrust in speeches. Secondly, and more importantly, we must give the power of speech to everyone. We must give the power of speech to everyone. We must also acknowledge that the essence of speeches is not to transfer information. Not primarily, at least. It is true that we do transfer information in a speech, but that is not why we deliver speeches. If we want to transfer information, if you want to transfer information, especially complex information, you do it much better in writing. Writing just does the job much better. The essence of a speech is rhetorical action in specific situations. Rhetorical action in specific situations. A speech is a meeting where one human acts with body and voice and create unity with other people, other humans. Think of the situation on a dark night in Kiev on the 25th of January 2022. Russia has bombed Kiev for 38 hours. Russian commando soldiers are hunting around for President Volodymyr Zelensky. Rumors have said that the president and his staff has fled Ukraine and that Kiev will quickly fall. Now, but the Ukrainian leaders have stayed to defend their countries, and now President Zelensky is standing with his closest associates in the governmental district of Kiev. In the dim, yellow evening light from the light poles, Zelensky lifts his phone and addresses the Ukrainians and the world. Good evening, everybody. The fraction leader is here. The head of the president's office is here. Prime Minister Shimal is here. Podolyak is here. The president is here. We are all here. You might think that the importance in these words is that the president is informing us and the Ukrainians that he is still in the country. And true, this is important information. But if we only see the speech as information, we will miss the rhetorical function and value of Zelensky's speech. Zelensky demonstrates with his body that he is present, with his voice that he is present, and by being present, by not running away, he physically establishes the character of himself and, dare I say, the Ukrainian nation. The speech does something. The speech acts and creates. The speech establishes a national ethos, and it creates a united nation. We need that. You need that. Your politicians need that. Speeches that establish who we are and what we value. If leaders and politicians only use speeches to inform or persuade, and I bet many of the speeches do, then we will surely lose trust in democracy. Because influencing and persuading postulates a hierarchical relationship. If I am informing you, then I'm giving you something that I have and you do not have. If I am persuading you, I am exercising rhetorical force upon you. And in both cases, I place myself above you, not besides you. Zelensky here is placing himself as part of the people, on the side of the people. He is literally among the people in the heart of Kiev. And this is what speeches that evokes trust do. They place the speaker among the audiences. They gather the words from the people listening. We trust speakers that are like us. We trust words that sounds a little bit like us. Trust then. What is trust? Well, there are many definitions of trust, and one definition of trust is that it is an attitude of optimism that the goodwill and competence of another will extend to us. But who do we expect to extend this goodwill to when engaging in democracy? Another definition says that trust is acting with few precautions. But who do we expect to act with few precautions when we engage in democracy? A third definition says that trust is the willingness to be vulnerable to the actions of others, expecting that they will perform certain important actions to us. But who exactly is it that we expect to be vulnerable, and to whom when engaging in democracy? Finally, a fourth definition says that trust is to believe that another has a commitment to do something and to rely on that person to fulfill that commitment. But if we are to trust democracy, exactly what is this commitment? Who has this commitment, and towards who? It seems to me that when we talk about trust in democracy, it is the voters, the citizens, that are expected to trust. Ordinary people. Ordinary people are expected to be optimistic about the goodwill of democracy. Ordinary people are expected to act with few precautions. Ordinary people are expected to rely on the institutions of democracy to fulfill the commitment that has been promised to them. Ordinary people are expected to be vulnerable. Do you think that as well? Do you think that your speeches or the speeches of politicians should evoke ordinary people's trust in democracy in this way? Maybe we ought to think speeches and politics the other way around. Maybe speeches and speechwriters and speakers ought to demonstrate trust in the citizens, show their trust in ordinary people. Maybe, just maybe, our speeches should do less talking and more listening. Maybe this is the route towards more trust. A listening speech is a speech that sees the world with the eyes of the audience. A listening speech is a meeting between your view and the audience view. Instead of using speeches just as information or persuasion, we ought to think about speeches as conversations or dialogues, as meetings between people. So, our speeches ought to show that we listen. But, as I've been trying to say today, we should also help people sound their own voices. If speeches are to help bring trust in democracy, then it's not enough that leaders and politicians can speak. Then we need a society where everyone can speak. We need to help every citizen, every child, every adult understand that they too have the power of speech. We need to help everyone to find out what they believe in and make them able to express it in a persuasive way. We should trust people, ordinary people, to make their voices heard. That's why I began with the story of my friend who wetted his pants in the fear of speaking. This is now more than 40 years ago since he stood silently beside the teacher's desk. I hope that he's no longer afraid of talking. I also know that he's not alone in his fear of speaking. Maybe even some of you have this fear. I teach rhetoric, presentation, speech-making to kids and students, teachers and business leaders, and most of them are uncomfortable doing speeches. The Norwegian winner of the Nobel Peace Prize in Literature 2023, Jon Fosse, is one of those people. One of those people that are uncomfortable with speech-making. The Nobel laureate began his Nobel Prize lecture like this. When I was at junior high school, it happened without warning. The teacher asked me to read aloud, and out of nowhere, I was overcome by a sudden fear that overpowered me. It was like I disappeared into the fear. And it was all I was. I stood up and ran out of the classroom. I noticed the big eyes of the students as well as the teacher following me out of the classroom. The fear, Jon Fosse says, took language away from him. This is a Nobel Prize laureate in literature. The fear took his language away from him. And he distanced himself from the spoken language. Fosse describes the spoken language as a monological communication of a message, that something should be like this or like that, or it's a rhetorical communication of a message with persuasion or conviction. Is this how you think about the speeches you hear, you write, you deliver? Probably. However, such monological communication is not the kind of speech that brings trust in democracy. If speeches are to bring trust in democracy, then those words should not only be the words of our leaders, it must also be the speeches of the people. Yes, I mean this literally. Speeches can bring trust in democracy if we give the ability of speech-making to everyone, if we help everyone to overcome the fear of speaking out. If you are a politician, if you are a speechwriter, you should do speeches that listen as much as they talk. And yes, speeches can listen. Now, I hope you thought that I've been listening a little bit, and I'm not entirely sure what you expected from me today. Perhaps you expected me to tell you how to write and deliver speeches? Speeches that can persuade ordinary people to trust democracy? Well, I'm sorry, I did not do that. Instead, I asked you to trust the citizens of Europe. I've asked you to listen to the people. I've asked you to give everyone the confidence and the ability to speak eloquently. Speaking is good. Speaking is essential for democracy. But before you speak, you should listen. So before we ask people to trust in democracy, we should begin by trusting the people. And importantly, we should help them stand up and make speeches.
Thank you very much, Jens. Thank you very much, Professor Jens Kjeldsen, to take us so high. And it was literally a masterclass for us. And what we take away, one thing we take away is that writing and pronouncing speeches is also about to listen. And that's not something that is the most obvious, but that's clearly a takeaway. I forgot to say in my introduction that you are the winner of the Cicero Grant Award. For those who are not familiar with speech writing, this is the equivalent of the Palme d'Or, I could say, for speech writing. So this is really the ultimate award that you can have in that field. Let's move now to the conversation between you and Isabelle. Isabelle is our own EPRS expert in speech writing. She is also the founder and the animator and the promoter of the Speaking with Impact community. So some colleagues in the room are part of this collective exercise, and I can say, because I have been also benefiting from you, Isabelle, that you have really helped us from the analyst or the researcher function to be also able to speak and to address members and to bring that spoken word as part of our daily work. And I think that many colleagues in the room are thankful to this role that you have played. I shall also have shown that both of you are authors of this book. So I have mentioned the e-book. So this is the book of Jens. This is also available in paper form here. And the book of Isabelle, Parler avec Impact. And you will be also surprised, I said before, it's about listening, and there it's also about watching, because she makes the link to a lot of famous pictures, famous pieces of art, and it's a fascinating read. Over to you, Isabelle.
Merci, Etienne. Thank you so much, Jens, for indeed what is truly a masterclass. We are supposed to have a conversation now. So the event was announced as a conversation between an academic and a practitioner, but it's reacting to the masterclass with my perspective as the practitioner. We want this conversation, this event, to be as useful as possible to you, the audience in the room, the audience online. So whether it is for members, like Vice-president Negrescu, as speakers, members of the parliament, their assistants who are in the room, I recognize some of them, whom I have met at the info sessions on speech writing skills. So you are in charge of writing the speeches of your members. That's your job. There are also speechwriters from the Parliament, other institutions that I recognize, the European Commission. So for all your speeches to other members in the Parliament, citizens, business leaders, farmers, students, public at large, whatever, whoever is your audience, how can we help you with this event so that our speeches, the European speeches, can bring trust in democracy? We have an issue with trust. We know it from our own experience, just as colleagues, citizens, that trust is not what it used to be a few decades ago. We know it from research. We know it from opinion polls. There are some polls on this. Today, the latest Eurobarometer is being released. Actually, it was released this morning just while we were having another event with you, Jens. So I haven't yet seen it, but all this knowledge informs us of the state of trust, which is probably somewhere here. Including among leaders. I'm sorry to say this, but that it's what can we do to help this trust? What can we do so that speeches can bring back trust in democracy? The first, after listening to what you have shared, is that at least we do not harm. We do no harm. That's the first thing. That at least the speeches do not worsen the situation. But they can indeed, as you have hinted, they can improve it. I've worked as a speechwriter since 2011, and part of my job when I was in the Commission leading the network of speechwriters was to monitor speeches from all the commissioners, European leaders, the heads of states and governments in the countries where I speak the language, make a few, not all, but a few, and month after month, see the best examples of what we could see. So I have this experience of what European speeches are and whether they bring trust or how we could help so that they bring more trust in democracy. I've identified 3 ways in which, from a practitioner's point of view, speeches can bring trust in democracy. The first one will be speeches can bring trust in the audience, in the people we are speaking to. If we go back to the word in democracy, they can bring trust in the demos, in the people who are there. As speechwriters, as speakers, we have to be very careful that there is not a disconnect between what our audience have in mind, what they hear, what they worry for when they come to the event, when they look up to the members of the parliament. They expect something, and they have words in their mind while they expect something, and that what they hear is not in words that would not resonate with them. Because of our history, the European institutions, by contrast with member states or other states, we are still very recent. We are only a few decades old. And this history of our institution was, with all the good things it has done, it was done in a technocratic way. It was a lot of knowledge and jargon among people, economists, lawyers who understand each other and who develop the project as such. So we are used to a very technocratic language, and these institutions have very much communicated in a very technocratic way. So our institutions, this is our history. Also for many of us here, whether it is staff, speechwriters, members, we are used to this vocabulary. So among each other, we understand when we speak this jargon. But it creates a disconnect then with the people we want to reach. We speak about the same issue, but not in the words they have in their minds when they think about it. Not in the words they use when they spoke with their friends and families just before going and listening to our speeches. They had different words. So we are familiar with jargon, with acronyms, you can hear, and we have to be very careful that this does not create harm. Sorry. There's also something I've learned over the years, the temptation among us that by using this vocabulary, this very technocratic vocabulary, that is precise, that is useful for us, we feel we belong. We belong to those who speak like this. We belong to these institutions. We belong to these circles. But by using them, we might lose the demos and the idea to bring trust back in the audience. So that's really a slippery road for our speeches. And the speechwriter's job, something I've learned over the years, the speechwriter's job is to be the advocate of the audience. When the speakers ask, can you please put these figures, these latest statistics, these good graphs, the speechwriter said, I'm thinking about the audience. I'm not sure they will understand. How can we translate this? We have to be the interpreter or the translator or the advocate, or we have really to be on the side of the audience and make sure that we can bring this in the words they use. Can we say the same things, the same complex things in simple words? That's the most noble task of a speechwriter. From a practitioner point of view, I could describe it this way. Can we say the same so that the demos in the democracy can understand? And it's possible to do it without frightening your German colleague. I remember when I was monitoring the speeches, so I spent a decade monitoring speeches by European leaders. You mentioned the German colleague. Especially in Germany, I was monitoring the speeches, of course, of the Chancellor, but also of the President of the German Republic, who is, as the head of state, less often in the news than the head of government. And whether it was Joachim Gauck or Franz-Walter Steinmeier, the speeches would have matched the expectation of your German colleague. Not super eloquent with a lot of high style, but really humble, easy, accessible, really reaching out without creating something too strong, creating something deep but not too strong. So from a practitioner's point of view, this is one way we can bring trust in democracy, by putting trust back in the audience, how they speak. And this was probably trust in the sense of the goodwill and the competence. After bringing trust in the audience, my second part will be bring trust. Speeches can bring trust in the European project. I think my aha moment on this was during the pandemic, when there were so many lunchtime conferences that we could listen to with speakers on a whole variety of subjects, plenty of events online. I noticed that several European leaders would quote, to inspire us, Mark Twain, Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs. They are not European. This is not who we are. And also something that is really deep to my heart, and in the book, they are all men. I'm really glad there were men. But there should also be female voices and female speakers, unquote, by women. I've continued to observe this. I think Mark Twain ranks maybe the first in the quotes we give in the speeches, but if we believe in the European project, and as members, as speakers, as speechwriters in these houses, in these European institutions, we do believe in this project. And then we should quote who we are. These examples from the European history, European culture, European literature, stories, myths. We have a whole variety of speakers and stories to tell from our different countries. There's just so much. There's so much, but it's not what you will find first. First, when you go to collection of speeches, to websites with quotes, to all these tools for speechwriters, you will find a lot of these American speakers, male speakers, American stories. So you really have to dig in more to find these references. I've done a lot of this work in the book precisely to help European speechwriters, so that they already have dozens of these examples. It was extra work. It was also extra pleasure, extra curiosity, extra excitement to find them. And I know that for you, as I'm speaking, I can see you reacting your faces. It will be more work to research them and to use them. But it will also be greater satisfaction and bringing trust in the European project. That we are not, if I may say like this, copying poorly and badly what the Americans do. We are doing well and proudly what we Europeans can do when we speak about the European project. I was also thinking about this dimension when the pandemic hit. Europe had already been through pandemics and had reinvented itself and transformed its society. When the war in Ukraine hit, that was tough. But again, Europe has a story to tell about overcoming wars and what to do. There was also this tectonic moment, the way that we spoke about this shift in February 2022. And Europe, our history, our long history, has already been through such massive changes. And we have reinvented ourselves. So I really invite speechwriters to dig further, speechwriters and speakers to dig further into the European project, which is also a European treasure to inspire. And I think this way we can bring more trust in the... Etienne, I think there's a hand raising for a question, but I think it will come later. Huh?
That's not a question. I was wondering if this is going to be a conversation.
Yeah?
Because I would really like to hear a bit more from the invited guests, and we'll have an exchange. So I was just wondering.
I bring a few comments from the practitioner's point of view, I understood, and then with questions? And then to bring...
Sorry, yes, exactly. This is the way we organize the event, that we have the two presentations and then we have indeed the Q&A. And I note your hand as the first to put a question. Yes, it's planned. It's coming. Sure.
On the experience as a practitioner and from the invited guests,
It's coming.
We are framing it. We are framing it, exactly. And I'm coming to the last thing that you just embodied very well by taking the floor. That's the idea that we put trust in ourselves as we speak. Framing the conversation. My third point would be to highlight a lot of us in Europe haven't learned this rhetoric, this discipline, this technique, to use the word of Aristotle. We haven't learned how to do it, which is why we lack this confidence and incidents like the one you mentioned at the beginning. And so it's to be aware there's something to learn and to practice. There's this discipline, this body of knowledge to discover, and then discipline in the sense of practicing it. So a lot of this is typically in your books, in your articles. There's a lot. This library is the house of a lot of knowledge on this that we can explore. I think it's extremely important that we collectively learn how to do it so that, as you said, every voice can be heard and we hear more diverse voices than the voices we hear so often. We hear more young people's voices. We hear more female voices. We hear more diverse voices and not always the same voices. I will stop the framing here and raise maybe a few questions to open the conversation. If you could say more on your project, Seize the World. You've just ignited our curiosity on this. If you could say more on how it works. In one of your... Okay, so please, go ahead.
Oh my God, I have sound. What a wonderful feeling. And I have to say that I knew what was coming because I was not going, what? Is she talking for so long? No, that's because I knew that I would say something and Isabelle would say something and then we'll talk. So we're now at that point. So for me, everything is perfectly fine. Isabelle mentioned a national speaking competition that I've created in Norway that's called Seize the Word. And it's basically a way to try to do what I just encourage you all to do, namely help other people seize the word. So what we do is we teach teachers in high schools to teach rhetoric and eloquence to young kids. Now I say rhetoric and eloquence, it sounds very lofty. I just mean make their voices heard. Talk about something that you think is important, and then we help them say it so that others may listen. So around all the schools they do this, and they end up in each school in all of Norway with a competition, and they select a winner, and then we have 60 winners that we look at, and then we choose 6 of those winners to a national competition, and we choose 8 to 10 for a Scandinavian speech festival. And I think we should have that in every European country. And then we could do, can we get the money now? No. And then we could do like a European final. And we thought about that, but of course language is kind of a problem. Because someone would speak, I don't know, Greek and Spanish and Danish, and that's not, and then, or we should all speak English like we do now. And my first language is not English. As most of you, not English, but still here we are. But we do our best. But the main point is that's what we do in Seize the Word. And really what I wanted to do, I wanted to teach people in kindergarten how to express their opinions. But that was a little bit too small for individuals. But I think we should start early because it's not about just technical things. Oh, you should start with a story, you should do so and so. It's also, and perhaps most importantly, a question of giving people the feeling that they have the right to stand up. Yeah.
Empowering and self-confidence.
Exactly.
Good.
Exactly.
About this, we can take some questions or comments or contributions from the room. Pernilla, please. Wait, because we have microphones, otherwise people don't hear you. This room. And if you can introduce yourself, we know you, but maybe not everybody knows you. Tell who you are.
From the EPRS. No, it doesn't? Yeah,
Yes,
no, it
it's
does.
on.
Oh, yes, I have to have it here. I had this training. You have to touch your cheek with it. Yes, I'm Pernilla Jordan. I work with the European Parliamentary Research Service. And I was lucky because my kids went to a Belgian school where they actually did speak from 4 or 5 years old in front of the whole class. They could speak of anything. They were asked to speak for 5 minutes, but they could continue for 50 minutes if they wanted to. It could be something very simple. It could be something from their home, from their room. It could be something scientific. It could be something very easy. And it was really beautiful to see how it worked and how my kids came home also to talk about what they have learned from their classmates. So from a very early age, and it made a difference, I think. So I think they still are quite comfortable taking the floor in front of people because they started very young before they were afraid, actually, from the others.
Do you think, Pernilla, that changed them as human beings? I mean, if they'd been in another school, they haven't done that. I mean, one thing is I can now speak, and I can speak a long time. I'm thinking about their sense of self.
Yeah, I think it makes a difference, yeah. It was good for them, very good for them.
How did it change them, if I may?
I think they still are quite comfortable taking the floor. My son is a musician, he likes to be on stage, so yes, I think it did make a difference for them.
Thank you.
Right. Any further comments or contribution? I see a gentleman in the back. Yes, with the white shirt. Over to you. And we can take a couple of comments and then reactions.
Hello, and thank you so much.
I don't want to be rude, but could I ask you to stand up?
Sure.
I'm becoming the teacher, and I was like, everybody stand. If you want to say something, stand up. I'm sorry, but yeah.
I hope I won't be like your colleague or your friend in class. But Professor, thank you so much. I was wondering, you made such an interesting difference between written and oral communication in speech making. Where do you think something like social media falls? I'm in the scientific foresight unit, and I was wondering your thoughts on online expression, for example.
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I'm tempted to say, I don't know. But the weird thing about online communication, especially in social media, is that it is somewhere in between writing and speaking. So it's, in some senses, it's close to writing, and I even mean ancient writing because it's symbols. It's like hieroglyphs or something, right? Which you then have to decode with the meaning. If someone sent you, well, I won't give that. If someone sent you a symbol, you have to figure out what that is. So that makes it very close to ancient writing, if you will. On the other hand, the way you write to each other is more like you would do in a conversation. I mean, even in the old days when we wrote an email, we would be very formal. I mean, do any of you do that? Of course, in some settings, but in most emails, the most emails I write, I start with, hey, so what do you think about so-and-so? So in one sense, we've removed ourselves from the traditional formal written language in emails, and I think in the social media, it's somewhere in between. This is not my area of research. I'm tempted to say it's like speaking, but it's not. It is a new and different mix, really.
If I may follow up a little
Please.
bit, where do you think that puts governmental communications to the people? Should we think of it more akin, like a social media post from, say, the EPRS, is that more akin to a speech to an audience, or is it more like informational texts?
I have one golden rule, or 1.5 perhaps. So the one golden rule is, what do you want to achieve? What is your goal? And connected with that is function. Mm-hmm. So you do something best in an email or in an online message, and you do something best face to face. You can imagine, I don't know, Zelensky, Martin Luther King, Barack Obama with a PowerPoint. Yeah, we laugh. Why do we laugh? Because it doesn't make sense, right? Why doesn't it make sense? Because the function of the speeches that I just mentioned is not to transfer information. So I think that I talked to some of you today. The most common answer is that it depends, but you have to find out what it depends on is what you want to achieve. So I'm sorry if I can't give you sort of a finite answer, but there are some issues that you do best in writing, and there are some issues you do best with a personal meeting. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, in the front we have a question. Federica, you can give the micro, and if you can introduce yourself.
Oh yeah, and I'll stand up because then you'll see me.
Oh, yeah,
but
sorry,
then nobody will. Hi, Eleonora Russell. I'm a speechwriter at NATO headquarters. I was very intrigued by what you said about being on the same level as your audience and the trust and the value in that. But you also spoke about the effectiveness of autocratic speeches, how speeches can be used for evil. In autocratic systems, there's a very clear hierarchy between the speaker and the audience, and yet it is still effective. Mm-hmm. So how can we harness the effectiveness of autocratic rhetoric without the autocracy part of it, obviously?
That's a different question. I think if we think about, I don't know where you would place Donald Trump as a speaker, but I think one of the, if I may use him as an example, one of the attraction with Donald Trump is that many people think that he speaks like they think. So even though there's a different, everybody says, oh, why would they vote for him? He's so rich, he's so different from them. Well, maybe, but he speaks in a way, he expresses himself in a way that is like the way that they think and feel. And then the other point is, I think it's very easy for us to say, oh, these people are bad and these people are good. And we should not help the bad people, we should only help the good people by coincidence, which is us. Because we are the good ones. And I don't know where you would put yourself here, but if we are to have a democracy, we'd have to listen to all voices. And I'm perhaps a little bit naive, but I think in the end, if we make all voices heard in the long run, I think, like Victor said, the truth will come out on top. And I know you think this is very, very naive, but I don't really think we have much other choice. So, and I'm really back to what I started to say, we have to teach people rhetorical citizenship, and that's two things. One thing is to decode rhetoric, which means to decode manipulation, people not answering questions when they're in a debate, people telling lies. And the other thing in rhetorical citizenship is to be able to express yourself. And I know it's a simple and slightly naive answer, but I don't think we have much other choice, really, than to educate ourselves in the reception and to educate ourselves in the production of rhetoric. And also, well, I won't talk too much. That was my point with listening, right? Because if we don't listen to what we call the autocratic forces, then we won't really understand them. And then we already push them aside, and that's absolutely not helping. Because imagine yourself, if you have a very firm conviction of something, I'm going, you're wrong, oh God, you're so stupid. Will that change your mind? I don't think so. But if I ask you to explain why you feel and think the way you do, I mean, I won't change you there and then, but at least I'm trying to open up to you a little bit, and hopefully you will open up to me. And I think we have too little of that.
Thank you, Jens. Isabelle?
Thank you. On what we can learn from how effective they are, I remember our attention as speechwriters being drawn to how much when Donald Trump speaks, he tests a new way of saying something, and he listens how the audience reacts. And if it works, he repeats, and otherwise he tries a different way. Observe how he does it in his speech. He's very much in listening mode. Yeah. I try something, will they react? Will they laugh? Will they applaud? Will they repeat? He's very much into this. That's one way we can also see what works and try and be effective. Listen in different ways.
Thank you. Yes, I had the gentleman here in the back, please.
Hello.
Hello there.
Claudio from the European Parliamentary Research Service. A question to both Jens and Isabelle. You, Jens, told a story that I think is the one thing that I will remember in 1 month, 1 year, perhaps 10 years' time. do you both think that members of the European Parliament, like Mr. Negrescu, should tell more stories like the one you've told? And if so, how can we convince them to do that? Thank you.
The answer is absolutely. Absolutely. All the speeches need to be much more vivid. You need to do speeches that appeals to the senses. You need to write speeches where people can smell, hear, touch, and especially see. Cicero writes somewhere, the sight is the keenest sense of them all. So the answer is absolutely. And there are research that says that if you start out with a story, preferably a vivid story, people will be more attentive during the rest of the speech. So that's the answer. So then the difficult thing, how can you convince them to do that? I think nothing succeeds like success. So if you make them use stories in a situation where that will bring them success, the feeling of standing there and feeling, wow, this worked, they will remember that. Now, I don't know how you do that. I don't know which situation you put them in, but let them, and we know this from persuasion research as well, you don't ask people for a lot to begin with. You ask for small things, and then a little more, and a little more, and a little more, and then they're hooked. So I would suggest find a very good story, something that they're comfortable with, put it in the beginning, have them do it, and it must be something that they care about. So I don't know how you do this, if you follow people around, if you hear them tell a story in the lift or something, where you can see that they go, oh, I did, where they light up. I don't know if this is an answer, but the first is easy, yes, absolutely. And the second is try to give them an experience of success with a story.
Oh, you just... no, good. I was to say absolutely, already said. Then that we learn, speechwriters, or that we teach to the assistants how to tell well a good story in this professional setting. Not everyone feels comfortable with the idea of telling a story, so that we know how to do it. It's very easy, but just that we know how to do it. And then I was thinking, yes, the speechwriter's job here would be to look into examples where a member told a story and it was we don't have the list of these examples right now, but to look into this, that's the research part of the speechwriting. And with this example, to convince, just tell it, and the story will do its work.
Right, thank you. I have a question here in the middle.
Michal from DG Research, thank you so much for your presentation. My question would be about Mr. Zelensky. You mentioned this situation in Kiev, and for me it was a kind of ideal example when public speaking generated public understanding. But you mentioned that it was an extreme case. Usually it's not the case. Public speaking generates either misunderstanding or disagreement. So I would like to ask you to mention a couple more examples where public speaking generated public understanding. Thank you.
What do you mean by public understanding?
Because by public understanding, it means that everybody on that square in Kiev knew at that time, President Zelensky is here and we need to fight for freedom. So there was no misunderstanding. It was so clear.
Okay.
Clarity, I think it would be the clear word. Clear understanding.
I have an example that is also from an extraordinary situation. May I provide that?
Sure.
So in 2011, a terrible terrorist in Norway went to a little island where young people from the Labour Party celebrate every year. And maybe you know about this, of course. And he shot people to death. And he also bombed the place where the Prime Minister sits and all the place where all the parliamentarians work. Not many days after this terrible, terrible disaster, the Prime Minister at that time, Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO General Secretary, did a speech in the church in Oslo. Now, even though I'm Danish, I feel Norwegian, and I felt at that point. Because what that speech did was tell us who we are. So the speech was not like George Bush back after 9/11 saying we will hunt down and kill these people. And I'm not necessarily saying he should not have said that, but that was creating one kind of community, constituting one kind of people. What Stoltenberg said was, we will never give up democracy. And what I thought, more compassion was what he said. And I thought, yes, this is who we are. We will not lock down the country. We will not start hunting people. We will take this as, if you will, proper Norwegians. He didn't say that. But that really hit home with me, and basically all of Norway. Me personally, I thought, yes, I want a country where a politician, a member of parliament, can get on his bike or her bike and bike to the parliament. We cannot introduce many new ways of living because of this. This is not who we are. And we know from research and research that I've done myself, that speech was like a keynote, ringing a tone that would ring towards the next many months and even years. Now, afterwards, people have been slightly more critical. Some people have said, we were never allowed to be angry. We are never allowed to feel rage. And I sense that, but I think that Mr. Stoltenberg's answer was the right one. And my answer to you is that to me and many Norwegians, it captured the situation, how to respond to the situation, and most importantly, who we are. So I think a good speech tells us who we are. Was that an answer?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
If you could give us a less extreme example of public speaking generating public understanding. Less extreme example.
Yeah. I think we should have Isabelle talk a little bit while I think about a less extreme example.
All right. Let's also, Isabelle, did you have any, time is flying. I'm watching the clock. There is another event after 3 o'clock, so we have also to have that in mind. And people have to go also to meetings. We are in the parliament. So, is there any question in the room? Yes, there's a lot in the front, and then I will give the floor back to Isabelle for some comments or questions on her side, and then we will soon reach the end. Over to you, Liselott.
Hi, thank you. My name is Liselott Jensen. I'm also with EPRS. I actually wanted to maybe try to reconnect a little with what you said about the conversation and listening, and also the earlier question on social media, although it's not your field of research specifically, but it can be a question to both of you. Because we are, I want to talk about the risks in not building trust, but ignoring this power that conversation could have. Because we have speaking platforms now where we can shut off comments.
Yeah.
And vote gathering ways of speaking where we're speaking in echo chambers. And being very happy about that, because that's nice. You don't have to discuss. But maybe just a few reflections on how, like, the attention we need to put on this risk, and also maybe some suggestions of how to monitor and overcome that risk in order to actually ensure the conversation and that we have someone to listen to that aren't just ourselves. Thank you.
Oh, very good and very difficult questions. There are some researchers, among other things, some researchers from Norway who've talked about the echo chamber thing, and they say, well, there is echo chambers. An echo chamber, of course, is that you only listen to your own, and you don't listen to anybody else, but that's not exactly what's happening. It's more like, no, I can ask you in Danish, hvad er en skyttegrav? How would you say that in English? Yes, it's more like trench warfare. So we're in a trench and they're in a trench and then we are throwing things at each other. So it's not just that we're not really listening to other, it's also that we are feeding off the others. So first I think we have to understand the structural aspects of this, that it's not just echo chambers. And then I'm not quite sure what your question was. Was it how do we deal with this or? Yeah. Yeah, how do we safeguard the listening aspect? I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I mean, if someone asked me, should you shut down the comment fields? I would say, yes, definitely. Sometimes you do, you should. But then again, sometimes you shouldn't. So, and I think maybe we're in a time now where it's very much either or. It's like, yes, we should shut down all comment fields. I don't think that's the solution. I think we should keep everything open as long as we can, but there's always a limit. And I can't tell you here now where that is. I think we have to negotiate that for each case. And for instance, in Norwegian papers, there are certain things where they don't have comment fields because they know where it will go. And then other things that are not so risky, they will have open comment fields, and if something happens, they will close them. And I mean, think about normal human relations. That's what we do. If you invite people home and you have a conversation, maybe you have an argument, that's fine. But when people start to get vicious, you might say, well, if you're going to be like that in my house, you have to leave. And it's a very simple example, but I do think it does apply also structurally. And I'm afraid that we have too many sort of principles that say everything should be open, because I do think that's hurtful. But I'm also very afraid of saying we should shut down, and we should not, which was my point today. I do think we should listen to very uncomfortable opinions. And I think if we don't listen to uncomfortable opinions, they will surely spread. Yeah, not much of an answer, perhaps.
I'd like to shine the spotlight on the dimension of risk. I will not so much comment on the social media dimension because this is not my field of expertise, but I think we should have a proper reflection, conversation on how far do we go with risks. Sometimes not taking risk is a bigger risk than taking a risk. So I think as speechwriters, as communicators, we should really reflect on this. Our institutions being, for good reasons, rather prone to avoid risks. But how far should we avoid risks? About risk, it reminds me of, speaking of risk and extreme examples, during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, one of the best speechwriters ever, Kennedy's speechwriter, Ted Sorensen, was asked to write a letter to try and defuse. No, he was first asked to write a letter, not to defuse, to write a letter to the Russians. He went back home, he tried to write the letter, he came back the next day and he said, as talented as he was, probably the best speechwriter of the 20th century, the letter wouldn't write itself. He just couldn't write a letter that would go further. Then he would ask to write another letter that would try to diffuse, and it helped to solve this crisis, to peace. So for me, this links to something else that is in your book, and that is another reflection, which is, are speechwriters here only to bring ornament and style, or should they be also part to the conversation about what we say and the sort of policy advisor dimension? So you also have this in the list of myths to debunk about speechwriters. Those who reflect about the risk and what want to say can have their conversation enriched by the person who will try and find how to say it. Once we know what we want to achieve, how can we say it and what would work? So I think there's a much richer conversation to have around risk and involving different perspectives on this, on the answer to your question.
Thank you, both of you. Any further? That's the very last one. Please, on the right.
Thank you. Dorothee Falkenberg from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. I was wondering if you see a gender dimension when you talk about these things, because I feel like sometimes the advice that you're giving is perceived very differently when a man is talking and when a woman is talking. And then sometimes a man seems like passionate when he says something, and the woman doing the same thing seems arrogant or taking up too much space. So I was wondering if you're aware of this gender dimension and differences in your trainings, or maybe also like in your experience. Thank you.
Yes, I'm aware of that. There's a lot of research into that as well, saying that there are differences and that many female speakers will be perceived differently, saying exactly the same thing as a man. Now, there's also other individual differences that are not gender-based. When we train, when we coach the young high school students, we try to make, especially the girls, more confident. They have a tendency, and I hesitate now because I don't want to stereotype, but I see this with my very own eyes. They have a tendency to almost bodily want to hide a little bit. I mean, even the way they stand. So we try to make them more confident and try to make them be the boss. We literally say this to them. Okay, Gloria, remember, you're the boss. When you're up here, you're the boss. And I think some of the young guys, not all, because some of the guys we don't discover that the guys have issues because they hide it. But especially the girls, when we teach them to be more confident, they become much better speakers. So I think even though it's right that women are very often captured in a sort of a double bind. I mean, they can't be too energetic because then they're a little bit too aggressive or even hysterical. But also they can't be too slow because then they're just boring and saying nothing. I think that we should do like Isabelle says, even though you're a girl or a woman, don't be afraid of being the boss on the podium. I think you disagree. I think that's what we need from boys and from girls, but I think we need it more from girls.
Yes, there's an issue for sure. Many female speakers come to me as you are a female speechwriter. So they say it. There's an issue. It's evolving. We are much further than we were 15, 10, or even 5 years ago. So it's evolving. Speechwriters can do something by quoting more women in their speeches, by having more examples of women, by helping female speakers to speak more, and also the other aspects of diversity, not only gender, but all the others. It's improving on and on. I've made a huge effort in the book to have more quotes by women. We need to do something like this. But just the very fact that many women took the floor this afternoon shows that it's evolving. So let's continue on this way.
Thank you, and I think it's a great conclusion from both of you. Let me thank Jens for coming such a long way and taking the time to talk to us this morning, this afternoon, and thank also Isabelle. I think they deserve a round of applause. Thank you. And thank you to all of you in the room here today for the very vivid conversation. Actually, we had a bit of controversy, and that's good. So I wish you an excellent day and see you at the next EPRS event, the next one being the Comparative Law Forum on, I think, the freedom of enterprise. Have an excellent day. Bye-bye.